So, My Hero Academia manga chapter 324 has officially released on Shonen Jump, and let's just say, this was probably one of the best chapters of My Hero Academia, and it also put into perspective something that we heard and something that we've known throughout the entire story, and kind of flipped it on its head. And we'll talk more about what that is in this video, right after this intro. Hey guys, how's it going? It is your boy, Manga Man Drew, and I'm here to discuss My Hero Academia manga chapter 324 and talk about the differences between the official and unofficial translations, as well as going into two major topics in this video. The first one is discussing the end of this chapter pertaining to what Deku in the narration says about being the greatest hero and how that is kind of flipped on his head with the last lines of this chapter. And the second thing I want to discuss is Ochako Uraraka's influence in the story in the next chapters and what she's going to be doing and what role she's going to be playing in the final arc of My Hero Academia based off what we know in this chapter. So, before we get more into that and getting into the differences, I'd like to ask you, if you haven't done so, to subscribe to my YouTube channel, leave a like and a comment down below if you like these type of content, so that I will know to continuously do this if this is something that y'all like. And without the way, let's get right into the discussion, starting with the differences. So when it comes to the differences between the official and unofficial translations for this chapter, there was not that many. There was obviously small differences between what certain words are said and the order that they were said in it, and I may go over one or two of those, but generally speaking, everything is pretty much the same between the official and unofficial translations. The certain dialogues and emotional scenes were conveyed pretty much the same, the dialogue of the characters were pretty much the same, and the emotions that I felt reading this chapter were pretty much the same when I read it twice. So the differences that I'm going to put out are very minute, and you could in theory read either one, but I would still say to read the official translations anyway. So to start off, there are just a small difference within the first 2 pages of this chapter, and it pertains to how Uraka in her narration brings up how she looks at the people and their smiling faces. Because in the unofficial translation, she says that she likes to see people's faces and she likes to see those happy faces, while in the official translation, she says she's always liked to see happy people. And that difference comes in the next page, because in the unofficial translation, she also brings up about how her gaze always wandered towards the people in the unofficial translation, but in the official translation, she says that her gaze or her sight was always wandering to the faces in the crowd. So it's a slight difference and it doesn't really mean anything, but I just find it a little bit funny about how these two phrases that are really connected to each other just have the dialogues flipped, or those specific indications of face and people flipped between the official and unofficial translations. So I just thought that was a little bit neat and I wanted to bring it up. And then the next difference comes in after Uraraka is beginning her speech, and after she begins chastising this one guy and telling him that the civilians don't have to fight and that the heroes will be the ones covered in filth, as well as we get the Weasel Girl once again saying how Deku saved her. The difference comes in when it comes to after she says that they cannot guarantee the civilian safety in reference to the heroes, because the heroes are also scared, they're also frightened. And before we get to that, there's actually one thing that I want to clarify, and it comes to a certain line that I perceived Uraraka was saying in the unofficial translation, where we get to see that she's pretty much saying and doing all of this not just for Deku's safety, not just for Deku, but for everyone. I thought that was coming directly from Uraraka. I thought that was her dialogue, but in actuality, it was Ida's dialogue that was said in both the official and unofficial translations. So that's something else that I wanted to bring up, because that's something that I didn't catch the first time reading through. The difference is just how one of Uraraka's monologues is portrayed, about how the heroes are just as afraid of the situation as the civilians, because in the unofficial translations, she says that how Deku has pretty much been fighting and hanging in there by himself, and how she wants the people to see that and see what he's doing. That is what was said in the unofficial translation. But in the official translation, it's more of Uraka is saying that she's always looked at Deku and seen everything that he has done and how it's changed her perspective of the world. And I think it's done better in the official translation because based off the official translations, if she was talking about how Deku has changed her perspective of what it means to be a hero, that directly ties in better with her ideas of when the heroes are hurting, who are there to save the heroes. While in the unofficial translations, it's more focused on her trying to show the people the trials and tribulations that Deku has gone through, and then it just immediately cuts over to Uraraka's ideas of who are going to be the heroes to save the other heroes. So if anything, the official translations allows that to flow a little bit better. And then from there, we get into another difference. And this one is not as big, but it is a difference when it comes to the official and unofficial translations. And the scene comes in when we get a flashback where we get to see and how Uraraka's parents are telling her, it's like, why are you looking at this random people? Look at the hero, as we see the people chanting "Ill Boy." And also a good reference for this flashback is that this hero, Ill Boy, is actually the same hero that tried to capture Compress as well as Toga, but was killed by twice. So that just shows that a weird connection that we wouldn't have known if we didn't see Ill Boy prior. But going into the difference between the official and unofficial translations is that in the unofficial translations, because in the unofficial translations, we get straight up what the answer to Uraraka's goal is, or Uraraka's question about who are going to be the heroes to save the other heroes. And in the unofficial translation, she basically says straight up that we have to save the heroes, meaning that the heroes that are going to save the other heroes are going to be both the civilians as well as the other heroes. But in the official translation, it seems to be a little bit more vague, but she does imply that the people who are going to protect the heroes, it is later most likely revealed to be the civilians. And I think that once again, in the official translation, I think that it's better to be a little bit more ambiguous and a little bit more vague because it leads to a more specific answer in the end. And I think it makes more sense for the civilians to be the one to save the heroes and the heroes to be the ones to save the villains, because it creates this circle, creates this cycle that is never ending that benefits both sides. And they're pretty much even on both sides, but then if you add like, oh, the heroes are also going to be the heroes to save the other heroes, that just makes it a little bit more complicated and unnecessary. And I think it's just best to stick to the heroes saving the civilians and the civilians are going to save the heroes. Not like actually saving them, but as we've seen with Ill Boy, the civilians should be able to rely on the heroes more and support them, and through that support, it saves the heroes because they're doing a very dangerous job, and you really wouldn't want to do a dangerous job if you get no support for it whatsoever. And then we get to a final change in this chapter, and this is going to lead right into a discussion that I really want to get into, but the last change comes in when the Weasel Girl is coming in, and towards the end of the chapter, also with Kota, that the civilians of these two people are there to help and support Deku, tying into the themes of the civilians are going to save the heroes while the heroes save the civilians. That would be the answer to Uraraka's question of who are the heroes to save the other heroes. And the difference comes in, and it's very slight, but it comes in after the reference of Deku in the first chapter as the narrator, where he says that this is the story of how I become the greatest hero. To clarify, he says greatest, not number one. And in the technical Viz translations of it, he says great hero, and I'm still a little bit partial to that, but I think the ideas of that the original idea that Hirokoshi was breaking up is that Deku becomes the greatest hero. But the difference between the official and unofficial translations is a transition, because in the unofficial translation, they just say that this is the story about how I became the greatest hero, as well as immediately cut into another page of this is the story about how we became the greatest heroes. But in the official translation, he pretty much says the exact same thing about how this is a story about how I become the greatest hero, but then it's like, and also the story about how we became the greatest heroes. So it's a slight difference, but I kind of like that transition because it shows that, and here's where we get more into the discussion, that this is the chapter where we get the confirmation that Deku is the greatest hero, and that the narration that we've been hearing all the way up until this point is coming from this Deku 2 years in the future and not necessarily adult Deku. And the implication that from this moment on, the narration is most likely going to be coming from a more adult Deku after the defeat of Shigaraki and after Hero Society has been rebuilt. So, to get more into the actual proper discussion for this chapter, the main controversy probably coming on with this chapter is the idea of Deku becoming the greatest hero, as well as everyone becoming the greatest hero at the end of this chapter. And potentially people may be irritated and mad about this, about how this doesn't fit with My Hero Academia. This is a story about how Deku becomes the #1 hero, blah, blah, blah. In which, if anyone says that this is a story about how Deku becomes the #1 hero, they're actually wrong. It's how he becomes the greatest hero. But here's the thing, just because he's the greatest hero now doesn't mean that he could always remain the greatest hero. And the reasoning why I bring this up is that the reasoning why he probably becomes the greatest hero now isn't because he is the strongest, or he's the best, or he's the most powerful, or the most beloved. It's that he embodies what it means to be a true hero, probably even more than All Might. And that's because at this moment, Uraka built a path to the greatest hero, and Deku, whether he chose to or not, walked down that path. And because the path to the greatest hero was paved by Uraka for Deku, it was at that moment that Deku became the greatest hero. Because he was doing all of this just for the unselfish reason of wanting to save people and to protect them, and that's pretty much what the greatest hero should be. Someone who's willing to protect the people no matter what. But then it ties into the idea of, if he's the greatest hero, then how can everyone become the greatest hero? And that ties into Uraraka's idea of who are going to be the heroes to save the other heroes. And what I'm getting to is this, is that because now Deku has become the greatest hero, and because that path to the greatest hero has been paved, literally anyone could walk down that path to become, if not the next greatest hero, to stand alongside Deku as the greatest hero. So that means that Uraraka could walk down that path, Bakugo, Ida, or even in this chapter, Kota and the Weasel Girl. Because here's the thing, they are technically one of the greatest heroes, because what makes a hero, how are true heroes born? They're the ones that jump into a situation without thinking, without reacting, without conscious thought, to help people. And in this chapter, what do we see? Weasel Girl immediately jumping in to comfort Deku. He only saved her. She felt so strongly for what he did that she's willing to help him. And that same thing goes for Kota, who Deku literally saved, and Kota is so enamored by him that he's wearing the exact same kind of red shoes that Deku wears. So the point is that when it comes to being the greatest hero, because of what Uraraka did and also what Deku has done, it's basically saying that anyone can become the greatest hero if they're willing to help, if they're willing to put in the effort for someone else for non-selfish reasons. And that is a core theme when it comes to My Hero Academia for many chapters prior. The fact that the reasoning why Hero Society collapsed is because it relied too much on a singular hero, a singular pillar of hope, All Might. But now they're building a society where people aren't just being reliant on just one singular hero, and they're not even going to be reliant on all heroes that are a part of the hero system, but they're going to be relying on everyone. Everyone is going to be playing a role in lifting up Hero Society, not just one hero, not just all heroes, but everyone. Because for you to lift up Hero Society, all of the heroes must be able to lift it together, and it's a lot easier to lift up a Hero Society when everyone is a hero. And that's kind of why Deku says that this is a story about how we all become the greatest heroes, so that if one of the greater heroes fall, they still have the entire society to fall back on because everyone is the greatest hero. So if anything, this just ties into the story and ties into the themes, which will lead to a hero society where everyone will be responsible for everyone. And if something bad were to happen, obviously the heroes who are licensed would go and save the day, but the civilians won't have any hesitation to support them in doing this. So that's kind of the reason why I'm not mad at this, and this is something that I kind of expected ever since I started reading and watching My Hero Academia. So yeah, this is just a cool part of this chapter that just ties into the bigger themes of My Hero Academia, and I just really loved it. So yeah, going from that line of the story about how Deku becomes the greatest hero, and that most likely from this point onward we're going to be told this story from a Deku that does not know exactly what's going to happen. So potentially we could get a adult Deku in the anime telling the story, or maybe not. It's not really that important, and I don't think the narration was really that important. But now we're going to get into something that is really important, and it's Uraka and how she's going to be playing a role in the future storyline. So, Uraka. There was a scene in this chapter where Uraka is talking about how she loves to see smiling faces. She wants to see everyone's face that is smiling. She wants to make sure that everyone is happy. But she has a moment of hesitation where she remembers something that Himiko Toga says, and that kind of like weighs on her a little bit. And I think it's at that moment, and I think that moment solidifies what the final chapters or what the final fight is going to be like. And what I'm saying is that the final fight is obviously going to be between the heroes versus the villains, but I think there's going to be a secondary goal. The heroes aren't going to be there just to beat down the villains, put them into submission, and then throw them in jail. They're obviously going to throw them in jail, but there's going to be a secondary reason for it. And that secondary reason for why they're fighting the villains is most likely going to be that the heroes are going to be trying to save them, because that's what heroes do. They save people first and foremost. And I think with this chapter showing that Uraka is thinking about Toga and how she feels pain and that she won't be smiling in this new world, it ties into what we've seen with other characters, and potentially we're going to see a lot of members of Class 1A as well as other heroes not just beating the heroes, not just beating the villains, but saving them. Because we already know that Deku wants to save Shigaraki because he wants to be saved. We know that most likely Shoto and Endeavor are going to try and save Dabi because of their family issues and the guilt that they felt about what happened to him. And now we have Uraka, who thinks about Himiko Toga and how she's not smiling, implying that she may try and have a new goal of saving her. So now, with that in mind, I have a list of people that I think are going to be the matchups for the final part of this arc, this chapter, this long saga when it comes to the heroes versus the villains. And I already went over a little bit of them, but I'm going to go a little bit more in detail in a few others. So for starters, obviously at the end, Deku is going to be facing Tomura Shigaraki. He may also face All For One, but we don't know. Shigaraki could kill All For One. That is a possibility. But most likely Deku is going to be there to fight, as well as Bakugo, and potentially Uraka as well. And I only say that because of the one page that apparently Hirokoshi drew of Deku holding Uraraka's hand, and it looks like that could possibly be from the last moments where Deku defeats Shigaraki, so that could be a possibility. Also when I said with Dabi, most likely Shoto as well as Endeavor are going to face Dabi, but I think another candidate to also face Dabi is going to be Tokoyami. Because we already saw Tokoyami already facing Dabi with Hawks, and Hawks got his wings burned off. So I think that it would be cool to see Tokoyami maybe trying to get revenge on Dabi and try to kill him, and that in that moment, instead of killing Dabi, he decides to spare him and save him and fight along Shoto to help save Dabi. So that's also a possibility. Another fight that I brought up is obviously going to be Toga versus Uraka. Uraka is most likely going to save Toga in one way or another, but I think it would also be cool if Froppy was there as well, because not only did Toga fall in love with Uraka and Deku and Stain, but she also sort of kind of fell in love with Froppy as a friend. So I think it would be also very thematically accurate to have Froppy there helping with Uraka to rescue Toga because of the connection that they've technically built from the invasion with the Vanguard unit versus the students during the summer camp arc. And then we get to Stain. And I think the obvious choice for any classmate that's going up against Stain, it's going to obviously be Ida. But it may not be like an actual fight. I think it's going to be more of a fight of ideals where Stain is like, oh, Ingenium, is that it? Oh, have you not learned your lesson? And he's like, oh no, I have. I want to save people with all of my heart. I believe that I'm a true hero. But even so, I still cannot allow you to continue down your path because you just killed people. Whether or not they deserved it or not, you killed people, so I have to take you in. I'm sorry, I'm not going to try to hurt you. So I think that there's also thematics between STONE and Ida, so most likely that is also going to be a fight that we may actually see a little bit sooner, because we've already seen STONE in the past few chapters, so Ida and STONE may have that confrontation a little bit sooner. And then we get to Spinner, and this is a very interesting one, because when it comes to Spinner, we got a little bit more details about him and his backstory during the Meta Liberation versus the League of Villains arc, or, as people will say it, My Villain Academia, where we realize that Spinner, when he was younger, was a shut-in. He was discriminated against because he looks like a lizard. Technically, he's a gecko, and his only ability is to stick to walls. But we see that he has had a hard time fitting in because he looks so much differently than everyone else. And we've seen that throughout the story in small bits and pieces, as there was a literal organization against people with heteromorphic quirks like Spinner that looked like animals or looked extremely differently. Basically the My Hero Academia version of the KKK, but we also saw a little bit more of that in some of the more recent chapters with the Weasel Girl and how people thought that she was a monster just because she looked differently. So I think probably the best people to go up against Spinner, if Spinner doesn't get an upgrade, is probably going to be characters that have sort of kind of heteromorphic quirks or mutation-like quirks that physically change the body, either with their powers or just over time. So that includes characters such as Tsuyu, Ojiro, Koda, Shoji, Tokoyami, and Hagakure. Characters that really aren't normal, quote-unquote, because they have physical mutations, and they are most likely considered heteromorphic quirks. But if I were to get one person to specifically do it, it will probably be Shoji, because among everyone else whose like physical bodies are different and modified, he's the only one that actually hides his face. But he does it for an altruistic reason. He doesn't want to scare the kids. He doesn't want to scare people, even though it's his own body. So I think that would be a cool idealistic contrast between Spinner and Shoji, where Spinner is kind of ashamed of how he looks, while Shoji is also a little bit ashamed of it, but he still accepts it as who he is. So yeah, next on the list is going to be Moonfish, and I think that there are a few characters that can take on Moonfish because we know that he has been freed from jail. Also, this list isn't going to be only the villains that we know aren't captured. I'm going to bring up a few villains that are captured because they could break out, or they could have already been broken out by All For One. We just don't know. We do know that Moonfish was broken out, and I think that with Moonfish, I think probably Bakugo could fight him as well as like a small mini boss, as well as Tokoyami, but that could be pretty much it. I think Moonfish can be easily taken care of by like really any of the students in Class 1A, so he could be like a character like Shoji could theoretically go and fight him again after, you know, because Moonfish cut off one of Shoji's arms, so that could be a possibility, but I think anyone right now in Class 1A could fight him and defeat him easily, so that is a little bit more irrelevant. But getting to a few more relevant characters, Gigantomachia. I think it's very obvious who's going up against Gigantomachia, and it's obviously going to be Mina and Kirishima. Potentially there are going to be more students fighting against Gigantomachia because, as we've seen, it literally took multiple people in Class 1A and Class B just to put the anesthetic in his mouth. To take down Gigantomachia just by 2 individuals? It could work. But the reasoning why I bring up Kirishima and Mina is because they're the ones that have direct connections with Gigantomachia through their flashback, where Kirishima was unable to jump in to save Mina against Gigantomachia as well as those little girls because he was too afraid, and how Mina was able to do that before she knew it was Gigantomachia, but when she faced him again the second time, she hesitated and got scared, and that almost got her killed. So I think they will be very thematic to have them, if they don't help win the fight, just being a part of the fight a second time because of their connection with Gigantomachia in both the present and their past. So yeah, that's Gigantomachia, and now we're getting to like the lower levels of this list. I'm going to start with probably Getten. I think that both Dabi and Getten may team up. They may hate each other. Actually, they definitely hate each other, but they may fight up together to help fight against Shoto. It could be a 2 versus 1 thing where Endeavor is taken out, Tokoyami is taken out, and it's just Dabi and Getten, and because of how their abilities work, Shoto's going to be put at a disadvantage, but that he's still going to come out on top even with that disadvantage of Getten literally being able to create ice and Dabi having even more powerful flames where Shoto can most likely use both of them at the same time and take them both out. So I think that Geddon will eventually go up against Shoto at the same time as Dabi. And then we get into a few of the people that are just like villains that just really aren't that important. Skeptic and the Nomus, they can be taken out by pretty much anyone. Heck, they don't even have to have the actual Class 1A take them out. They could be just normal heroes, normal pro heroes taking them out, so they're not that important. The same can be said about Reed Destro. The only reason why I bring up Reed Destro is because he was taken out by Tokoyami, so Tokoyami could go back for a rematch, but also because Reed Destro was also taken down by Edshot. So I think that for him, if he comes back, he's going to be taken down easily by really anyone, but it would be cool if Tokoyami is able to take him down for real a second time. And then you have Mr. Compress. We don't know if Mr. Compress is alive. He could be dead. But I think a cool person to go up against Mr. Compress would be Aoyama. Because if you remember correctly, when the villains invaded during the summer, Aoyama was the one that shot a laser at Mr. Compress's face and allowed for the marbles in his mouth to come out, where they were able to save Tokoyami, but they weren't able to save Bakugo. But because of Aoyama, they were able to save at least one of them. So I think they'll be very thematic to have, if Mr. Compress isn't dead, Aoyama come and face him again and win that fight, showing that, yeah, Aoyama is actually a hero as well, and that he's no longer afraid of fighting the villains, and that now he stuck up for himself to save a friend once again. And so, yeah, that's pretty much all of the villains that I really want to talk about when it comes to potentially how the matchups are going to be and how, for the most part, maybe these characters, a lot of them are going to be saved by the heroes of Class 1A. Some of them may be too evil to be redeemed. For instance, Deku tried to save Muscular, but he didn't get through to him. Muscular was just down this horrible path that he couldn't come back from, and Deku was like, all right, I guess I'm just going to have to take you in. So there are probably going to be characters, villains like that. Most likely that's going to apply to Moonfish, possibly Rappa when he fights against Kirishima. That's something else that I want to bring up. Potentially Kirishima is going to go up against Rappa because Rappa says, yo, if we are going to fight again, it's going to be a death match. So I think that that's going to be a cool fight. And I think it may be weird, but I think you could possibly make Rappa like switch sides. That, yeah, he's a villain. Yes, he wants to fight to the death, but maybe Kirishima beats Rappa down to the point where it's like, yo, you did it, kid, now kill me. And it's like, no, heroes don't kill, but maybe I'll save you. And that could switch Rappa to the side of good. He's probably still going to go to jail, but maybe he will turn a different perspective. Like, I guess if I love fighting, and if I die, then I won't be able to fight anymore. So you know what? I'll live. So that could also be a possibility. But yeah, like characters like Stain, Toga, Tomura Shigaraki, Dabi, they're most likely going to be saved by their respective heroes fighting them, and they're most likely going to be fighting heroes from Class 1A because most likely there is going to be a strong focus on the Class 1A members beating down the villains. They're going to attempt to save the villains themselves, as we've seen with Deku, Shoto, and most likely Uraka. So yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say about this chapter. This is probably going to be a very long video, but I really wanted to bring up these topics because it's something very interesting. And I may actually cut this video in half, I cannot say for certain, because I did talk a lot about the matchup, so that could be in its video on its own. But either way, I may keep it together, and if I do, you're gonna see this scene, and if I don't, then you won't see this at all. So yeah, that's pretty much all I really have to say about this chapter. Hopefully you enjoyed it, hopefully you liked it, and if you did, leave a like on this video. And if you really want to see more content like this, subscribe to my YouTube channel at Manga Man Drew if you like to see me talk more about My Hero Academia, and hit that notification bell to be notified for whenever I upload more content like this. Do all that cool jazz, and hopefully I'll be able to catch you in my next video. Goodbye!